Hey guys, today we're diving into the horrifying life of a space marine during the Horus Heresy. They were called the Emperor's Angels. But in those burning worlds, there was nothing angelic left. Only pain, betrayal, and endless war. There was order once, a purity of purpose so absolute that even the stars seemed to burn in rhythm with our march. We were warriors of the Imperium, not men, but instruments of his divine will. Each of us forged from pain, prayer, and precision. Each breath we took was sanctified by discipline, each heartbeat a hymn to the master of mankind. To be a space marine was to exist without question, to think only in terms of obedience, victory, and sacrifice. Our days followed a sacred rhythm, older than any world we conquered. The ship would awaken before the first light of a distant sun, vox horns blaring the morning catechism. The air smelled of oil and incense, a mix of machine spirits and devotion. We would rise from our sarcophagi of steel, armor plates locking into place with the sound of prayer made metal. Servo skulls drifted through the corridors, whispering fragments of the litany of purity in Binharic tongues. Training began as it always had. Motion without hesitation, combat without emotion. Bolters roared in the ranges like thunder beneath cathedral vaults. Chainsword screamed hymns of devotion as we drilled the sacred forms of death. Our instructors never shouted. They didn't need to. The discipline was total, imprinted into our gene seed, burned into our souls. Between drills we prayed. We always prayed. We prayed for the Emperor's gaze to fall upon us, for his divine purpose to cleanse our flaws, for the sins of humanity that we alone could bear. Some brothers prayed aloud, voices rising like chants of a distant choir. Others prayed in silence, heads bowed, their armor reflecting the soft amber light of votive candles. Even the smallest maintenance task, replacing a bolter's magazine, cleansing armor with holy unguents, was a ritual, a gesture of faith. Our chaplains would walk among us like black-armored prophets, their voices deep and solemn as they recited the oath of loyalty. We are the Emperor's will made manifest. We are his wrath. We are his redemption. And we believed. By the throne we believed. At mealtime, we gathered in the refectory of steel. No laughter, no idle talk, only the clatter of ceramite against metal, and the hum of the ship's reactors echoing like a heartbeat through the walls. The silence was not emptiness, it was reverence. We did not eat for pleasure but for fuel, for service. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when I would allow myself to look upon my brothers and feel something resembling pride. They were giants in form and spirit, carved from faith and fire, their faces calm, their eyes clear. There was no fear among us, for fear was a disease of mortals. We had been purged of such weakness long ago. Sometimes I would walk the observation deck between duties, gazing out into the void. Stars stretched endlessly, burning like votive candles lit for the Emperor's glory. I would imagine he watched from beyond them, distant, eternal, unblinking. We were his chosen sons, his angels of death, and that thought filled me with something I once mistook for peace. But even then, beneath the perfection of ritual and the steel-bound silence, something small and fragile stirred, a thought I dared not speak, not even to myself. Was this truly devotion, or merely programming? I buried the question deep under layers of prayer and duty. It was heresy even to feel it. So I focused on the rhythm of the day. Wake, train, fight, pray, sleep. An endless cycle of purpose. In those days, there were no doubts, no whispers, no cracks in the armor of our faith. The War Master led us and the Emperor watched over us. The galaxy burned at our command, and we called it salvation. The machine spirits sang in harmony, and the banners of our legion hung immaculate in the sanctum. Each bore the sigil of our oath, a reminder that we were more than men, less than gods, but perfect in our purpose. I remember thinking that nothing could ever change, that loyalty was eternal, that the Emperor's light could never dim, and perhaps that was the cruelest lie of all. The message came during the fourth cycle of watch, when the ship was cloaked in silence, and only the hymn of the reactors filled the void. I was sharpening my blade, not out of necessity, but out of ritual. The edge was already flawless. Still, I repeated the motion, stroke after stroke, letting the rhythm drown out the restless hum that had begun to haunt the decks in recent weeks. Then the Vox altar flickered to life. Its ancient machine spirit groaned as if reluctant to speak. The sigil that appeared on its cracked surface was unmistakable. The mark of the War Master himself, haloed in the double-headed eagle of the Imperium. Every warrior within the barracks froze, the air thickening as though the ship itself had drawn breath. The order was brief, clinical, devoid of ceremony. By command of the War Master Horus Heresy, the 19th cohort of the Legion is to redeploy to the Istvan system. Immediate readiness required. Glory to the Emperor and his favored son. The words were holy. They bore the Emperor's seal, transmitted through the sacred channels of the Administratum, authenticated by no fewer than 6 security sigils. Yet as I listened, something within me stirred, a faint, cold unease that I could not name. It was not the order itself, but the tone of it. The cadence lacked the Emperor's light. It sounded tired, heavy, as if spoken by a god beginning to doubt his own creation. Around me, my brothers moved with mechanical precision, gathering weapons and sacred oils, performing the rites of readiness. There was no discussion, no hesitation. Obedience is our language. Doubt is a sin. But I could feel it, an invisible current threading through us all, a tension that clung like frost. We prepared our armor in silence. The chaplain's voice boomed through the Vox halls, leading the benediction of departure. We go where duty calls. We kill where the Emperor wills. We return only when the galaxy is cleansed. Each line was answered by a thunder of armored fists against ceramite chests, a sound that once stirred pride in me, but now it echoed hollowly, reverberating like a dirge within my skull. When I entered the arming chamber, the red glow of lumen lamps painted everything in the color of blood. The servitors shuffled about, fastening purity seals, whispering litanies in broken Binharic. One of them, its face half metal, half decay, looked at me as if recognizing something unseen. For a moment I could have sworn it mouthed a word without speaking. Beware. I blinked and it turned away. We were ordered to board the dropship within the hour. The corridors buzzed with motion, but the usual fervor was gone. Instead of triumph, there was quiet, the kind of silence that grows in a tomb before the coffin is sealed. Brother Kyle approached me as I checked the power couplings of my bolter. Strange, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the machine hum. The War Master summons us himself, not through the Chapter Master, not even through the Primarch's Council. He paused, glancing at me. Do you think? Think nothing, I interrupted too quickly. Orders are orders, but the words tasted wrong, bitter, empty. When the dropship bay doors opened, I saw the war fleet of Horus for the first time in months. Thousands of vessels glided through the dark, massive constructs of death and devotion, their hulls inscribed with prayers to both Emperor and War Master. Yet some of those prayers had been altered. I noticed it in passing. A sigil etched anew where once there was an Imperial Aquila, now bearing the stylized claw of Lupercal. A minor change, perhaps, but it lingered in my thoughts like a thorn beneath the skin. Before we departed, the Vox crackled once more, carrying a final message. This time, the voice unmistakably that of Horus himself. Deep, resonant, commanding. Once I had found comfort in it. Now it carried something else, sorrow and conviction. Brothers, the Emperor calls us to war once more. We fight not only for his vision, but for the truth of mankind. Trust in me, as I have always trusted in you. For together we will forge a future free of chains. The Vox fell silent. Around me, my brothers raised their weapons in salute. For the Emperor, for the War Master, they roared in unison. The sound shook the hangar, a storm of faith and fury. But my voice did not join them. I wanted to. Emperor knows I wanted to. Yet something within me hesitated. A flicker of thought, small but unrelenting. A future free of chains? Why would the War Master speak of chains when our faith had never been bondage? The thought passed quickly, buried beneath years of conditioning and devotion. But it left a wound, invisible, festering, waiting. As the dropship descended into the black, I caught my reflection in the viewport glass. The face staring back at me was not the one I remembered. The eyes were the same shade of gray as the void beyond, cold and uncertain. Somewhere deep in the heart of that darkness, the War Master waited. And though the Emperor's sigil still shone upon the order, I could not shake the feeling that something had already begun to slip. a fracture too small to see, but destined to split the galaxy in two. The ship drifts through the void, cutting across the endless night like a silver blade forgotten by its maker. Within its iron hull, beneath vaults carved with prayers to the Emperor, the brothers march in silence. Each step echoes like the beating of a single immense heart, once unified, now faltering. The light of the lumen strips flickers, and for the first time in many campaigns, I hear something worse than the sound of war, the sound of whispering. They speak quietly. These warriors who once shouted praises to the Emperor with unshakable conviction, their voices now tremble with something unfamiliar. Not fear, but uncertainty. Someone mentions the War Master's new tone, the way his orders carry no longer the echo of devotion, but the weight of rebellion. Another swears that during the last briefing, he saw Horus's eyes flare with something unholy. Not faith, but fury. The whispers grow like mold in a forgotten chapel. They speak of gods, old gods, ancient beyond reckoning. Gods that offer visions of power and freedom, whispering promises through the veil of the warp. At first I laugh it off. Superstition, I tell myself. Madness. Nothing divine could speak to us except through the Emperor. That is the first law carved into the marrow of my soul. And yet, at night, as I sleep in the sarcophagus of my armor, I dream of a voice. It does not come from the Emperor. It is soft, ancient, and heavy with sorrow, or perhaps deception. It calls my name, not my title, but the name I bore before I became a son of the Imperium. I wake to find my hands trembling. My brothers avoid each other's gaze. We perform our rites, but our words have lost their weight. The sacred oils feel cold, the litanies hollow. The chaplain's sermons no longer ignite the soul. They merely echo in the dark, unanswered. The machine spirits groan in the decks, as if the ship itself has begun to doubt. One of my brothers, Varric, confides in me. His voice is low, his eyes haunted. They say the Emperor hides the truth from us, he murmurs. That Horus fights not against him, but for the truth of mankind. That the gods of the warp are not our enemies, but the makers of our destiny. I strike him reflexively, not out of anger, but terror. His words feel like poison, yet part of me knows I struck because I feared believing them. That night, I kneel before the shrine of the Aquila. I pray until my throat bleeds. I beg for a sign, any sign that the Emperor still watches, still hears us. But there is only the hum of the ship and the faint pulse of the warp beyond the hull. And in that silence, the truth creeps in like a wound refusing to heal. Something is changing. In the galaxy, in my brothers, me. I repeat the creed to myself over and over. There is only the Emperor, and he is our shield and protector. But the words no longer sound like truth. They sound like a memory fading in the dark. And for the first time since I took the oaths of the Legion, I feel alone. The engines roared like a chorus of captive gods as the warship broke orbit from Terra. Below us, the cradle of humanity burned with the cold light of morning. Oceans glimmering like veins of mercury. Continents buried beneath the haze of industry and devotion. I watched the planet shrink upon the view screen, until even its sacred glow was devoured by the black. It was as if the heart of the Imperium itself had turned its gaze away. For the first time in decades of service, I felt the weight of distance, not merely in measure, but in meaning. Terra had always been the symbol of everything pure, the throne world, the seat of the Emperor's eternal light. Now it was only a fading ember behind us, swallowed by shadow. The vigilant spear, our battle barge, groaned as it entered the warp. The transition ritual was performed with flawless precision. Incense burned in golden censers. The choir of tech priests chanted the litany of translation, and the navigator's eyes, black mirrors to the abyss, rolled back in their sockets as reality itself bent around us. And then came the silence, that unnatural, infinite quiet that follows entry into the immaterium, as though the universe itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if you survive the crossing. We called it the Emperor's Shadow. But to me, it felt like being buried alive inside a dream that never ends. At first, the days passed as they always had. Drills, maintenance, prayer, the illusion of normalcy. But something had shifted. Conversations that once centered around tactics and honor now drifted toward prophecy, visions, and truths unspoken. I tried not to listen, yet even silence became dangerous in that place, for the warp has a way of whispering back. The nightmares began on the third night. At first, they were small, fragments of memory, distorted. I would dream of the training halls on Luna, the smell of oil and sanctified steel. But then the scene would twist. My instructors' faces would melt away, revealing blank masks of polished bone. Their voices would echo like hollow bells, speaking in a language that made my blood crawl. I would awaken gasping, the taste of copper thick in my mouth, though I could not recall biting my tongue. Soon the dreams grew worse. I saw worlds burning beneath twin suns. I saw the Emperor, distant and radiant, reaching for me, only for his hand to dissolve into ash. I saw Horus kneeling before a great shadow, his armor cracked, his face both human and monstrous. And through it all, a single word echoed like a heartbeat in the dark: change. Each morning I would rise and dismiss the dreams as warp sickness, the price every warrior pays for crossing the immaterium. But the others dreamt too. I could see it in their faces, pale beneath the blue glow of the lumen strips. We avoided each other's eyes, afraid of what we might recognize there. Brother Kale confessed that he had seen the same vision. Horus standing in a sea of blood, holding a crown of thorns made of stars. It means nothing, I told him, though even as I said it, my voice betrayed me. The ship began to behave strangely. Machine spirits that once purred in obedience now groaned with agitation. Vox systems crackled with voices that were not our own. Once, during weapons maintenance, I heard my name whispered softly from the static. Not my rank, not my battle name, but the name my mother had given me before the Legion took me. No one should have known that name. I smashed the Vox panel apart with my fist. The whisper stopped, but its echo lingered inside my skull like a sickness that would not heal. Our chaplain increased the frequency of the purity rites. We prayed longer, harder, until our throats bled. We recited the benediction of faith. Through the void we march. Through the storm we endure. Through the warp we are made pure. But faith began to feel like armor worn too thin. Each prayer felt more desperate than the last, as if we were shouting into an abyss that had long since stopped listening. By the 10th day, sleep itself had become a battlefield. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something watching. Not an enemy, something older, vast, curious. The sensation was like standing beneath the ocean and realizing the weight of it could crush you at any moment. When I finally dared to confide in our apothecary, he said nothing, only pressed a vial of sanctified oil into my hand and whispered, "Pray louder." In the corridors, the walls began to bleed condensation, the air thick with the scent of ozone and incense. Some swore they saw faces in the reflection of the bulkheads, faces that did not belong to any of us. And always, always the dreams. I saw our destination, Istvan, a world blackened by war, its skies aflame, its soil thick with ash. I saw legions arrayed beneath banners both loyal and heretical. Brothers killing brothers, blood steaming in the dust. I woke in my armor, heart pounding. Vox beads filled with static that almost sounded like laughter. When I looked into the darkness beyond the viewport, I realized something terrible. We were not merely traveling through the warp was traveling through us. Each hour carried us closer to Istvan, closer to the War Master, closer to whatever truth awaited beyond that burning world. And though none dared speak it, I could feel it in the ship, in the air, in the bones beneath my armor. A truth we all knew but could not name. We were leaving more than Terra behind. We were leaving the Emperor's light, and there would be no return. The first thing I remember was the light, not the pale illumination of lumen lamps or the sacred glow of a shrine's candles, but a brutal, bleeding light, the kind that devours the horizon and stains the soul. When the dropship pierced the cloud layer, the world below opened like a wound. The sky was aflame, split by storms of ash and fire. The atmosphere itself screamed, torn apart by bombardment and warp distortion. Vox channels crackled with static that sounded like whispers. And even the machine spirits of our instruments shuddered beneath the weight of it. Istvan, a name that had once carried the promise of conquest, now looked like the corpse of a god. The descent was rough. The inertial dampeners flickered under strain. the hull groaning like an ancient beast. For a moment, gravity died entirely, and I floated within my armor, suspended between heaven and hell. Through the viewport, I saw rivers of molten rock carving through mountains of twisted metal. The surface burned with a feverish glow, like a forge that had forgotten what it was meant to create. When we finally broke through the storm front, the landing zone came into view, or what was left of it. The earth had been churned into a slurry of mud and charred flesh. The air shimmered with heat and radiation, thick with the stench of oil, blood, and ozone. Our landing retros screamed as the dropship came down amid the ruins of a once mighty city. The ramp fell open, and the world hit me, a wave of heat, stench, and sound. Every breath tasted of ashes and iron, my vox bead filled with fragmented prayers, half of them overlapping, others dissolving into static. We disembarked in silence, rows of armored giants stepping into a graveyard that stretched beyond sight. Statues of the Emperor lay shattered in the dust, their stone faces weeping black ichor. Imperial banners hung torn and defiled, their golden aquilas burned away by fire or by something far worse. The ground was soft beneath my boots, not from soil, but from the countless dead buried shallow beneath it. Some still wore the marks of the legions. Some were civilians, faces twisted in agony, mouths still open as if caught mid-scream. The warp had touched this place. You could feel it, in the air, in the bones, in the way shadows clung too long to the edges of vision. Brother Kale knelt beside a fallen warrior, his armor blackened but still bearing the insignia of the Luna Wolves, our own. He touched the dead man's pauldron and froze. "This mark," he whispered. The insignia had been scratched out, replaced by something crude, jagged, and wrong. A new symbol, one that twisted even to look upon it. The chaplain ordered him to stand. "The enemy desecrates what they cannot understand," he said, but his voice trembled despite the vox distortion. I turned my gaze skyward. Thunderhawks screamed overhead, their contrails glowing crimson as they descended toward the distant battlefront. Beyond them, the heavens themselves seemed to warp, clouds folding in upon themselves, revealing brief glimpses of something vast and serpentine moving behind the storm. For a moment, I thought I saw faces there, not human but aware, watching. Our Auspex scanners were useless. Readings spiked and died in intervals, showing nothing but static and noise. The tech marine muttered litanies to appease the machine spirits, but even his prayers were swallowed by the wind. Every sound was amplified. The clang of armor, the crackle of flame, the whisper of dust against ceramite. It was as if the planet itself were listening. As we advanced, we came upon a trench network, half collapsed from orbital fire. Inside were the remnants of an Imperial regiment, men and women stripped of their humanity by exhaustion and terror. They looked upon us not as saviors, but as omens. One soldier, his eyes wide and hollow, murmured as we passed, "They said you'd come back. They said you'd turn." Before I could speak, the chaplain silenced him with a bolt round. "Blasphemy spreads faster than rot," he growled. Reloading with trembling hands, we pressed on. Each step deeper into the ruins felt like crossing a boundary between worlds, from the realm of man into something ancient, hateful, alive. The air shimmered with colors that should not exist, the kind that burned the eyes and lingered in the mind. I heard whispers at the edge of perception, soft, familiar, coaxing. My name, repeated over and over until it became meaningless sound. The warp was here, not beyond, not within, but woven into the very matter of the planet. Reality sagged beneath its presence like a dying lung struggling for breath. We reached what had once been a cathedral to the Emperor, now reduced to a skeleton of stone and rebar. Its great stained glass windows lay shattered, their fragments crunching beneath our boots like frozen stars. I stepped inside, drawn by instinct more than reason. At the center of the ruin stood an altar. Upon it, a single aquila remained, twisted and molten, fused into the stone by some terrible heat. Around it, in the shadows, symbols had been carved, spirals and runes that pulsed faintly with light. Not reflections, movement. I raised my bolter, but my finger froze on the trigger. My vision blurred, and for a heartbeat I saw something impossible. The altar breathing. The stone itself rising and falling, like lungs struggling to inhale faith that no longer existed. Brother Varric's voice broke through my vox. "Sergeant, the readings are unstable. The warp is thickening. Reality's bleeding." He was right. The air rippled, and for the first time in my life I felt weightless without leaving the ground. The boundaries between the physical and the immaterial were eroding, thin, translucent, trembling. I stepped back into the light, if such a word could still be used. The world had changed in the brief moment I was inside. The sky had deepened to the color of dried blood. The horizon pulsed like a heartbeat. The very ground seemed to whisper beneath my boots. This was no longer a battlefield. It was a threshold, a doorway to something beyond understanding, a place where gods and men bled into one another, where faith was tested, corrupted, remade. And as I looked upon the burning sky of Istvan, I understood what the dreams had been trying to tell me. We had not come here to fight a war. We had come here to witness the birth of the first war, the war for the soul of mankind. We were 13 when we landed upon Istvan. 13 brothers carved from the same gene seed, baptized in the same wars, bound by oaths older than memory itself. We had once been a perfect machine, a single organism of faith and fury. Now, as I looked upon them under the bleeding sky, I realized that the symmetry was gone. The rhythm that once defined us had fractured into dissonance. Each of them bore the scars of 1,000 battles. But these were not the same marks of honor we had carried from campaign to campaign. There was something different now, subtle yet unmistakable. The kind of change that begins beneath the skin. Brother Kale was the first I noticed. He had always been loud in faith, his voice echoing through the prayer halls like a thunderclap. Now he was silent. His eyes never left the horizon, and when they did, they seemed to linger too long on the bodies of the dead. During the rites of preparation, he no longer recited the full catechism. He skipped verses, not from forgetfulness, but from choice. When the chaplain corrected him, he merely smiled, a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then there was Varric, our apothecary, once the most meticulous of us all. Now his hands trembled when he worked. He claimed it was the atmosphere, the electromagnetic interference, but I saw the truth. It wasn't weakness. It was hunger. A restless energy, as though his flesh no longer fit the shape of his spirit. I caught him once collecting samples from the corrupted soil, whispering to himself in binary prayer. When I asked what he was doing, he replied, "The planet remembers us. I'm only listening." Brother Corvian, our heavy weapons specialist, had always been the anchor of our squad. Calm, grounded, unshakable. But since we set foot on Istvan, he had begun to laugh. Not the laughter of joy or camaraderie, but the kind that follows too close behind despair. In the middle of silence, he would chuckle under his breath, muttering lines from the litanies of hate, in a tone almost mocking. When questioned, he said he was merely testing the faith of the echoes. Even our sergeant, Lucien, once a living embodiment of duty, had changed. His armor bore more purity seals than ever, each one freshly inscribed. Yet his prayers had become desperate, frantic, as though he were trying to bury something unspeakable beneath them. He avoided the eyes of his men. When he spoke, his words were measured, cautious, as if each syllable were being weighed against the judgment of unseen ears. And there were the others, ghosts of the warriors they had been. Brother Malthus, who had begun carving strange symbols into the interior of his armor. Brother Taro, who slept standing upright, claiming he no longer dreamed, though his armor was always slick with sweat when he awoke. Brother Aaron, who stopped eating entirely, saying he could draw sustenance from the air, that the breath of the gods nourished him. I watched them move through the ruins like a procession of relics, their shadows stretching long across the corpses of men they might once have called brothers. The bond we shared, forged through fire and faith, was decaying before my eyes, and yet none of them saw it. They still called me brother. They still recited the oaths. They still bowed their heads before the Aquila. But something in their voices had changed. The words no longer carried weight. They were performing faith, not feeling it. Each syllable rang hollow, like the clanging of an empty chalice. I began to notice the smallest of things. How Kale's armor sigils had been subtly altered. How Corvian's weapon bore inscriptions I could not translate. How the once blue lenses of Varric's helmet now glowed faintly red when the light dimmed. The changes were small, almost insignificant, but they multiplied with every passing hour. At night, during rest rotation, I heard murmuring from their quarters. At first, I thought it was prayer, but prayer had cadence, form, purpose. This was different, fragmented, rhythmic, and wrong. It had the texture of language, but not its structure. Like listening to a heartbeat trying to learn how to speak. Once, I tried to confront them. I asked Lucien directly what was happening. He looked at me for a long moment, his face a mask of exhaustion and defiance. "You still think this is war, don't you?" he said quietly. "You still think we're here to fight?" I didn't answer. He leaned closer, his breath misting against my helm. "The galaxy is changing, brother. We can feel it. You will too." Then he walked away, leaving me in the half-light surrounded by the hum of machines that no longer sounded like machines. After that, I stopped asking. We fought side by side in silence. When the enemy appeared, traitor or loyalist, it no longer mattered. We slaughtered them with the same efficiency as always. But there was something absent in the violence. The purpose was gone. It was as if we were acting out the motions of faith without understanding its meaning. Between battles, we gathered around the remains of a fallen statue, a headless effigy of the Emperor. No one spoke his name anymore. Instead, Kyle would trace the cracks in the stone and whisper something I could not hear. The others listened, heads bowed as though the ruined idol spoke back. That was the moment I realized it. The line between devotion and damnation was thinner than a blade's edge. I looked at my brothers, and for the first time since I had taken the oaths of the Legion, I did not see comrades. I saw strangers wearing familiar faces. I saw the reflection of something vast and patient working behind their eyes, something that was waiting. The bond that had made us unbreakable was now the very thing that would destroy us. Still, I marched with them. Still, I prayed beside them. Still, I called them brother, because the alternative, to admit that I was already alone, was a truth I wasn't ready to face. It began as all corruption does, softly, invisibly, like a breath in the dark. The first whispers came not from traitors, but from the faithful. Men who had fought for centuries without hesitation now found their voices lowered, their words laced with doubt. At first, it was nothing more than speculation, the idle murmuring of soldiers trying to make sense of orders that no longer made sense. The Emperor, one would mutter over the dull glow of a ration fire, has turned away from his sons. He builds something on Terra, something that will make us obsolete. Others swore that the War Master had been poisoned by Xenos relics, his once pure soul tainted by the shadows of the warp. Every story contradicted the last, yet all shared the same taste. Fear not of the enemy, but of the possibility that our gods might bleed. By the time we reached the ruins of the orbital bastion, the air itself carried the weight of rumor. Even the Vox signals that rippled through the fleet seemed alive with it. Half-words, distorted phrases, messages sent and resent until their meaning became poison. No one could tell where the rumors began. Some said they came from the Luna Wolves. Others claimed they were seeded by the word-bearers, those zealots who had always spoken too intimately of gods. I remember the first time I heard it spoken aloud. We were cleaning our bolters, the rhythmic sound of gears and sanctified oil filling the silence. Brother Kyle leaned close and whispered, "They say the Emperor betrayed Horus." I froze. He said it as if repeating a prayer. He left the War Master to die on Davin, sent him into a trap. The gods saw his suffering and offered him the truth of what the Emperor really is. I turned to face him. "Careful," I said. "That is heresy." He smiled faintly. "Heresy," he echoed, as though tasting the word for the first time. Maybe heresy is just another name for revelation. I wanted to strike him, to silence the blasphemy before it could take root. But I didn't, because in that moment, Emperor, forgive me, I wanted to hear more. It wasn't curiosity. It was something deeper, a hunger born of fatigue, of endless campaigns and unanswered prayers. And so the whispers grew. They moved through the ranks like a contagion that fed on silence. When men stopped praying, they started listening, and the warp, ever patient, always listening in return, began to whisper back. Our chaplain, once the iron heart of our faith, began to falter. His sermons grew frantic, the words losing shape. He spoke of unity, of loyalty, of trust, but his eyes betrayed the lie. He too had heard the rumors, and he feared they might be true. We had all seen the Emperor's absence. We had all fought under his name without ever hearing his voice. Horus had spoken to us. He had led us. He had bled beside us. And if one must choose between the voice that commands from a throne of gold and the voice that fights in the mud beside you, the choice is not as clear as it should be. At night, the dreams returned. They were no longer chaotic, but structured, purposeful. I saw Horus standing beneath a black sun, his armor split in bleeding golden light. I saw the Emperor high above him, not in compassion, but in judgment. And between them stretched a wound in the universe, wide enough to swallow the stars. I awoke with a word burning on my tongue, though I could not remember speaking it. Truth. Brother Varric confessed that he had begun hearing voices while he worked, faint, like echoes of distant prayers. They spoke of freedom, of choice, of ascension. He said they came from the machine spirits, that even they had grown tired of servitude. Do you not hear it? He asked me once. In the hum of your armor, in the rhythm of your heartbeat? The galaxy is speaking, brother. The Emperor cannot silence it forever. I told him to stop, to remember who we are. But as I said the words, they felt brittle, fragile. A creed repeated too many times by mouths that no longer believed. Rumors became belief. Belief became doctrine. And doctrine, once accepted, becomes reality. Some claimed the Emperor had ascended beyond humanity, that his physical form had perished, and the Imperium was now ruled by a corpse king of flesh and machinery. Others whispered that Horus had uncovered the true gods of mankind, beings older and greater than the Emperor himself. They said the warp was not chaos, but creation, and that we, the Astartes, were meant to be its vessels. I wanted to laugh, to call them fools. But when I looked around, I saw that no one was laughing. Fear had turned to fascination. Faith had turned to obsession. Even the silence between us had changed. It was no longer the comfortable stillness of warriors united in purpose, but the waiting hush of conspirators on the edge of revelation. The line between truth and heresy blurred with every passing day. Each whisper carried a piece of the puzzle, each rumor another drop of poison. I could not tell which frightened me more, that the Emperor might have betrayed his son, or that his son might be right. One night, I found myself praying, not to the Emperor, but to something unnamed. I asked for clarity, for guidance, for a sign that there was still a right side to stand on. The answer came not as words, but as warmth, a slow, creeping heat that began behind my eyes and spread through my veins. It was intoxicating, almost divine. When I opened my eyes, I was alone in the dark, my breath fogging inside my helmet. My armor's auto senses whispered faintly, replaying the ambient sound from the Vox. And there it was, a voice faint and distant, speaking a phrase I could not forget. The galaxy does not need gods, brother. It needs believers. I shut the Vox off and sat in silence, trembling. Because I knew that voice. It was Horus, or something wearing his voice either way. I listened.